The rain battered New York City streets, a gray curtain that blurred the world outside my tiny apartment window. I was 28, broke, and staring at a rejection email from yet another publisher. The words, "not a good fit," burning into my skull. Then my phone buzzed with a lifeline job no one else wanted. I'm Ethan Cole, a freelance editor who'd clawed his way through the cutthroat publishing world only to be spat out by its gatekeepers. The gig was with Horizon Press, a mid-tier house desperate to salvage a manuscript by Julian Cain, a writer whose debut novel had been a fleeting hit before his reputation tanked. They called him a diva, a has-been, a liability. My job: fix his mess of a second novel or watch it in my career crash and burn. I met Julian at a cramped coffee shop in Greenwich Village, the kind of place where the air smells of espresso and broken dreams. He was late, of course. When he finally strode in, all sharp cheekbones and stormy gray eyes, I felt the room shift. Julian Cain, 29, carried himself like he owned the world, but his leather jacket was frayed, and his hands trembled slightly as he slid into the booth. "You're the editor they sent to tame me?" he asked, voice low, laced with defiance. "I'm the editor who's going to save your book," I shot back, pushing my glasses up my nose. I wasn't here to play games. His manuscript, The Hollow Crown, was a sprawling, chaotic epic about a disgraced king turned villain, but it was drowning in overwritten prose and plot holes. Horizon had given me 3 months to make it marketable. Failure wasn't an option not when my rent was overdue and my dreams of being a real writer were slipping away. Julian leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "You think you can rewrite my soul?" he asked. I didn't know then that his words would haunt me, that his story would unravel mine. We started working that night, poring over pages under the coffee shop's flickering lights. Julian was maddening defensive one moment, vulnerable the next. He'd argue over every comma, then admit, in a rare, quiet moment, that he was terrified of failing again. "This book is me," he said once, his voice raw. "If it flops, I'm done." I wanted to hate him for his arrogance, but there was something in his fear that mirrored my own. I'd always known I was gay, but I'd buried it under deadlines and ambition. Growing up in a small Ohio town, I'd learned to keep my heart locked away. Julian, though, was unapologetically himself out, proud, and unafraid to challenge anyone who dared judge him. His confidence was magnetic, and it scared me. Every late-night session, every heated debate over his manuscript, pulled me closer to him. I told myself it was just professional respect. I was lying. By week 3, we were spending more time together than the job required. Julian would drag me to dive bars, where he'd recount wild stories from his brief moment of fame parties with literary elites, scandals that made headlines. But he'd always circle back to the book, to the villain at its heart, Cashin. "He's not evil," Julian insisted one night, his voice slurring slightly from whiskey. "He's broken. People don't get that." I started to wonder if he was talking about Cashin or himself. The manuscript was improving, but so was the tension between us. One night, as we argued over a pivotal scene, Julian grabbed my hand to stop me from scribbling notes. His touch lingered, electric. "Why do you care so much?" he asked, his eyes searching mine. I didn't have an answer, not one I was ready to admit. The days blurred into weeks, and Julian's manuscript became my obsession. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., scribbling notes about Cashin's motivations, trying to untangle the mess of Julian's words. But it wasn't just the book pulling me in, it was Julian himself. He had a way of making the world feel bigger. One evening, he convinced me to ditch our usual coffee shop for a rooftop bar in Brooklyn. The city skyline glittered below us, and Julian, in a rare moment of openness, told me about his childhood in Chicago. My dad kicked me out when I came out at 17, he said, staring at his drink. Said I was a disgrace. I've been proving him wrong ever since. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed the hurt. I wanted to reach for him, to say something profound, but all I managed was, "You're not a disgrace." He looked at me then, really looked, and something shifted. "You're not what I expected, Ethan," he said softly. I didn't know what he meant, but my pulse raced. I changed the subject, diving back into the manuscript, but the air between us felt charged, like a storm about to break. Back at my apartment, I pored over the Hollow Crown, seeing Julian in every line of Cashin's dialogue. The villain was a man who'd lost everything: his throne, his love, his hope, and turned his pain into power. I started to understand why Julian fought so hard to protect him. Cashin wasn't just a character. He was Julian's way of processing his own scars. Our next meeting was at his place, a cramped loft in the East Village cluttered with books and half-empty wine bottles. Julian was pacing, agitated, because I'd suggested cutting a scene where Cashin betrays his lover. "You don't get it," he snapped. "That's the heart of the story. Cashin doesn't want to hurt him, has to." His voice cracked, and I saw the weight of something unspoken. "What are you so afraid of, Julian?" I asked, stepping closer than I meant to. He froze, his eyes locked on mine. "I'm afraid of being seen," he whispered. "Really seen." Before I could respond, he kissed me. It was sudden, desperate, and it set my world on fire. I kissed him back, my hands finding his face, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and need. When we pulled apart, he looked as shocked as I felt. "This can't happen," I stammered, backing toward the door. I fled into the night, my mind screaming that I'd just ruined everything. The next day, I avoided his calls. I told myself it was about the job, about staying professional, but the truth was I was terrified. I'd spent years building walls around my heart, and Julian was tearing them down. But I couldn't avoid him forever. Horizon was breathing down my neck, and the manuscript was due in 6 weeks. When we met again, Julian acted like the kiss never happened, but his eyes told a different story. We worked in silence, the tension thick enough to choke on. I focused on the manuscript, suggesting changes to make Cashin's arc more redemptive. Julian resisted at first, but slowly, he started to trust my judgment. "You're good at this," he said one night, almost reluctantly. "You see things I miss." I wanted to tell him I saw him, to his pain, his passion, his fear of failing. But I kept it professional, even as my feelings grew. I was falling for him, and it was dangerous. Julian was the villain in the publishing world's story, unpredictable, untrustworthy. And I was the editor no one wanted, gambling my career on a man who might break my heart. The manuscript was taking shape, but my life was unraveling. Every moment with Julian felt like walking a tightrope, thrilling, terrifying, and impossible to turn back. I'd catch myself staring at him during our sessions, memorizing the way his lips curved when he smirked or how his hands moved when he talked about Cashin. One night, after hours of editing, we ended up at a diner in Hell's Kitchen. The neon lights buzzed overhead as Julian leaned back in the booth, his guard down for once. "Why do you do this, Ethan?" he asked. "Edit other people's stories when you clearly want to write your own." His question hit like a punch. I'd been dodging that truth for years, hiding behind red pens and deadlines. "Because I'm good at fixing things," I said, avoiding his gaze. "Not at creating them." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing mine. "You're wrong," he said. "You're creating something right now. With me." My breath caught, And for a moment, I let myself believe him. But doubt crept in. Was I just another project to him? Another story to rewrite? The next week, Horizon's editor-in-chief, Margaret, called me in. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd seen it all. "You're doing good work, Ethan," she said, "but don't get too close to Julian. He's trouble." Her warning echoed my fears, but it was too late. I was already in too deep. Julian started opening up more, sharing pieces of himself he'd kept hidden. He told me about his first love, a boy from high school who'd broken his heart when their relationship was exposed. "I thought I was over it," he said, staring out my apartment window. "But every time I write Cashin, it's like I'm reliving it." I wanted to hold him, to tell him he wasn't alone, but I was still scared of what that would mean. Our work sessions grew longer, spilling into the early hours. One night, as we argued over Cashin's ending, Julian grabbed my notebook and tossed it aside. "Stop hiding behind this," he said, his voice low and urgent. "What do you want, Ethan?" I couldn't lie anymore. "You," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop it. This time, when he kissed me, I didn't run. We fell into each other, a tangle of need and fear. It wasn't just physical, it was like we were rewriting each other, peeling back layers of doubt and pain. But the closer we got, the more I worried. Julian's career was hanging by a thread, and mine wasn't much better. If Horizon found out, I'd be fired. If the book failed, we'd both be ruined. The manuscript was nearly done, but the stakes felt higher than ever. Julian was pushing for a tragic ending, Cashin sacrificing himself to save his kingdom. I argued for redemption, for hope. "People need to see he can change," I said. Julian's eyes darkened. "Not everyone gets a happy ending, Ethan." I wondered if he meant Cashin or us. Falling for Julian was like editing a story with no outline, chaotic, exhilarating, and full of risks. We stole moments between editing sessions, kisses in the shadows of his loft, whispered confessions over late-night coffee. But the closer we got, the more I felt the weight of what we were risking. Horizon was thrilled with the manuscript's progress. Margaret called it a miracle, but she kept a close eye on me, as if she sensed something. I started lying to her, to myself, saying I could keep my feelings separate from the job. But every change I made to Cashin's story felt like a plea for Julian to let me in completely. One night, Julian showed me a letter he'd found while cleaning out his loft. It was from his father, written years ago, apologizing for disowning him. I never replied, Julian said, his voice hollow. I didn't know how. I took his hand, feeling the weight of his pain. "You don't have to carry this alone," I said. For the first time, he didn't pull away. But the world outside our bubble was closing in. A gossip blog posted rumors about Julian's unprofessional behavior with his editor. The post was vague, but it was enough to make my stomach churn. I showed it to Julian, expecting him to laugh it off. Instead, he went quiet. "This could ruin us," he said. "You should walk away, Ethan. Save yourself." I wanted to scream that I couldn't, that he was worth the risk. But doubt gnawed at me. What if he was right? What if loving him cost me everything? I threw myself into the manuscript, polishing every line, making Cashin's redemption arc shine. It was my way of proving we could make this work, both the book and us. We hit a breakthrough one night when Julian agreed to let Cashin live, to give him a chance at redemption. "You're right," he said, his voice soft. "He deserves a shot." I felt like he was talking about himself, about us. We celebrated with cheap wine and a night that left me dizzy with hope. But the next morning, reality crashed in. Margaret called me into her office, her face grim. We're hearing rumors. Ethan, she said, about you and Julian. Tell me they're not true. My heart pounded, but I lied, saying it was just professional. She didn't look convinced. Finish the book, she said, and keep your distance. I left her office shaking, knowing I couldn't stay away from Julian. But the fear was real now. The manuscript was due in 2 weeks, and the gossip was spreading. I started to wonder if I was strong enough to fight for both the book and the man who'd changed my life. The manuscript was nearly finished, but my heart was a battlefield. Julian and I were in too deep, and the world seemed determined to pull us apart. Every stolen glance, every touch, felt like defiance against the rumors and the risks. We worked feverishly, finalizing the Hollow Crown. Cashin's arc was now a journey from villainy to redemption, a mirror of the hope I clung to for us. Julian was different now, less guarded, more willing to trust my edits. But the closer we got to the deadline, the more I felt him pulling back, as if he sensed the storm coming. One night, in his loft, he broke. I'm poison, Ethan, he said, his voice raw. Everyone who gets close to me gets hurt. I grabbed his shoulders, forcing him to look at me. You're not poison, I said. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. He kissed me then, hard and desperate, like he was trying to believe it. But the rumors wouldn't stop. A second blog post named me directly, calling our relationship a conflict of interest. Horizon was furious. Margaret called me in again, her voice cold. You're off the project, she said. We'll have someone else finish it. I begged her to reconsider, but she was done. You crossed a line, Ethan. Pack up your things. I stumbled out of her office, my world collapsing. I went to Julian's loft, needing him to tell me we could fix this. But he was already packing, his face pale. I'm leaving New York, he said. I can't drag you down with me. I tried to argue, but he cut me off. You deserve better than this, Ethan. Better than me. He left that night, and I was alone with a half-finished manuscript and a broken heart. I spent days in a haze, replaying every moment, wondering where I'd gone wrong. But I couldn't let the book die. It was all I had left of him. I worked in secret, polishing the final chapters, pouring my heart into Cashin's redemption. I sent the manuscript to Margaret anonymously, with a note, this is Julian's story. Don't let it fail because of me. I didn't expect a response, but a week later, she called. It's brilliant, she said. We're publishing it. But you're still fired. I didn't care about the job anymore. I just wanted Julian to know his story would live. I tracked him down to a small town in Vermont, where he was hiding out, trying to start over. When I showed up at his door, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Why are you here? He asked. Because I love you, I said, the words spilling out. And because your story matters. I handed him the manuscript, now a bound proof. He stared at it, then at me, tears in his eyes. You didn't give up, he whispered. Not on the book. Not on me. Vermont was quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of New York. Julian's cabin was small, cluttered with books and empty coffee mugs, but it felt like him raw, real, and a little broken. I stayed for days, and we talked like we never had before. He told me about the fear that had driven him away, the shame of his past failures, the weight of being labeled a villain in his own story. I thought I was protecting you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I was just running. I took his hand, promising I wasn't going anywhere. We worked on the final edits together, not for Horizon, but for us. The Hollow Crown was more than a book, no, it was our story, woven with pain and hope. Cashin's redemption became our anthem, a reminder that broken things could be mended. But the world hadn't forgotten us. The gossip blogs kept churning, and Horizon's decision to publish the book sparked a firestorm. Some praised Julian's comeback. Others called it a publicity stunt. My name was dragged through the mud, labeled as the editor who'd compromised the project. I didn't care. I'd found something worth more than a byline. Julian, though, was struggling. The attention was suffocating, and he was terrified of failing again. One night, he broke down, admitting he'd been offered a book tour but was too scared to take it. What if they hate me? He asked. I held him, my heart aching. They won't, I said. And if they do, I'll be there. I convinced him to go, promising to stand by his side. The tour started in Boston, a small bookstore packed with curious readers. Julian was nervous, his hands shaking as he read from The Hollow Crown. But when he spoke about Cashin, about redemption, the room was silent, captivated. I stood in the back, my chest tight with pride. After the reading, a young man approached Julian, eyes bright with tears. Your book made me feel seen, he said. I've been hiding who I am for years. Julian hugged him, and I saw the weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time, he believed in his own story. We traveled together, city after city, facing the crowds and the critics. Some nights were hard hecklers, bad reviews, old wounds reopened. But we faced them together. Julian started smiling more, his confidence returning. And I started writing again, inspired by him, by us. The book tour was a whirlwind, but it was also a beginning. Julian's story was resonating, climbing bestseller lists, and he was no longer the villain the press had painted him to be. I was still out of a job, but I'd found something better purpose. We settled back in New York after the tour, sharing a tiny apartment in Brooklyn. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Julian was writing again, a new novel, and I was his first reader, his partner in every sense. I started my own manuscript, too, a story about love and redemption, inspired by everything we'd been through. But the past wasn't done with us. One day, a letter arrived from Julian's father. He'd read The Hollow Crown and wanted to reconnect. Julian was torn, his old wounds raw. I held him as he cried, promising to support whatever he chose. After days of silence, he decided to meet his father. The meeting was tense, awkward, but it was a start. His father apologized again, this time in person, and Julian listened. They didn't fall into each other's arms, but they talked, and that was enough for now. You gave me the strength to do this, Julian told me later, his voice thick with emotion. The Hollow Crown was optioned for a film, and Julian was suddenly in demand again. But he stayed grounded, refusing to let fame define him. He spoke openly about being gay, about the struggles he'd faced, and his honesty inspired others. I watched him shine, knowing I'd played a part in his redemption. I landed a new editing job, this time with a small press that valued my work. It wasn't the big leagues, but it was honest, and it gave me time to write. Julian and I were building a life together, one messy, beautiful step at a time. One night, as we lay in bed, Julian turned to me. You rewrote my story, he said. Not just the book, you rewrote me. I kissed him, my heart full. You rewrote me, too, I said. And in that moment, I knew we'd found our happy ending, not perfect, but real. Years later, The Hollow Crown was still being read, its pages worn by readers who saw themselves in Cashin's journey. Julian and I were still together, our love stronger for the battles we'd fought. We'd moved to a small house upstate, a place where we could write, laugh, and just be. Julian's new novel was a success, and I'd published my first book, a quiet story about two men finding each other against the odds. It wasn't a bestseller, but it was mine, and Julian's pride in me was enough. We'd learned to navigate the world's judgments, to lean on each other when things got hard. One evening, as we sat on our porch watching the sunset, Julian took my hand. "I was the villain no one wanted," he said, his voice soft. "But you saw something else." I smiled, leaning into him. "I saw you," I said. "And I'd rewrite your story 1,000 times if it meant we'd end up here." Our life wasn't perfect. There were still whispers, still doubts, still moments when the world felt too heavy. But we faced it together, two men who'd found redemption in each other. The Hollow Crown had been our beginning, a story of pain and hope that mirrored our own. And as the stars came out, I knew we'd keep writing our story, one page at a time, forever.